In the remote wilderness of Alaska, two of the world's most powerful leaders are preparing for a meeting that could reshape the global order. President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin will sit down face-to-face next Friday, August 15th, for their first in-person encounter since Russia launched its devastating invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This isn't just another diplomatic meeting, it's a moment that could determine the future of millions of people caught in one of the most significant conflicts of our time. The timing of this summit is extraordinary. For nearly 3 years, the world has watched as Ukraine has fought desperately to defend its sovereignty against Russian forces. Hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost, entire cities have been reduced to rubble, and millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes. Now, in the pristine landscape of America's largest state, Trump and Putin will attempt to find a path forward that has eluded world leaders for years. But this meeting comes with controversy already swirling around it. Reports suggest that Putin has arrived at the negotiating table with a ceasefire proposal that would require Ukraine to make significant territorial concessions to Russia. The very idea has already sparked fierce debate about what constitutes a fair peace and whether any agreement that rewards aggression can truly bring lasting stability to the region. Before we dive deeper into this developing story, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with anyone interested in understanding this pivotal moment in world history, and subscribe to our channel for continued coverage of the events that are shaping our world. The choice of Alaska as the meeting location carries its own symbolic weight. This vast territory, purchased from Russia in 1867 for what many at the time called Seward's Folly, represents one of history's most successful peaceful transfers of territory between major powers. Whether this historical precedent will influence the discussions between Trump and Putin remains to be seen, but the location certainly adds a layer of historical irony to the proceedings. The logistics of bringing together the American and Russian presidents in Alaska represent a massive undertaking. Security considerations alone require coordination between multiple agencies and governments. The remote location, while symbolically significant, presents unique challenges for media coverage, diplomatic protocols, and the practical arrangements necessary for such a high-stakes international summit. As the world watches and waits, questions multiply faster than answers. What exactly will Putin propose? How will Trump respond? And perhaps most importantly, what role will Ukraine itself play in determining its own future? These questions will define not just the meeting in Alaska, but potentially the course of international relations for years to come. At the heart of this unprecedented summit lies Putin's reported ceasefire proposal, a document that could fundamentally alter the map of Eastern Europe. According to sources close to the administration, the Russian president has presented a plan that would end the fighting in Ukraine, but at a price that many consider unacceptable: territorial concessions that would effectively reward Russia's military aggression with permanent control over Ukrainian lands. The concept of territorial concessions in modern warfare raises profound questions about international law and the principles that have governed global relations since the end of World War II. The United Nations Charter, signed in 1945, explicitly prohibits the acquisition of territory through force. If Putin's proposal involves Ukraine permanently ceding territory that Russia has occupied through military action, it would represent a direct challenge to these fundamental principles of international order. While the specific details of Putin's ceasefire proposal have not been made public, the very mention of territorial concessions suggests that Russia seeks to formalize its control over areas it has occupied since the 2022 invasion began. This could potentially include regions in eastern and southern Ukraine that have been under Russian military control for varying periods during the conflict. The timing of this proposal is particularly significant. Russia's presentation of a ceasefire plan comes at a moment when the military situation on the ground has stabilized into what many observers describe as a war of attrition. Both sides have invested enormous resources in fortifying their positions, and the front lines have remained relatively static for months. This military reality may be influencing Putin's calculation that now is an opportune time to seek a negotiated settlement that preserves Russian territorial gains. From a strategic perspective, Putin's willingness to engage in direct negotiations with Trump represents a significant shift in Russia's approach to the conflict. For months, Russian officials have insisted that they would only negotiate with Ukraine directly, not with Western powers they viewed as puppet masters. The fact that Putin is now meeting with the American president suggests either a change in Russian strategy or a recognition that American involvement is essential for any lasting agreement. The international legal implications of any territorial concessions cannot be overstated. If Ukraine were to formally cede territory to Russia as part of a peace agreement, it would set a precedent that could encourage other nations to pursue territorial expansion through military force. Countries around the world are watching this situation closely, understanding that the resolution of the Ukraine conflict could influence their own territorial disputes and security calculations. For Russia, the push for territorial concessions represents an attempt to achieve through diplomacy what it has struggled to accomplish through military means alone. While Russian forces have occupied significant portions of Ukrainian territory, maintaining control over these areas has proven costly in terms of both military resources and international isolation. A negotiated agreement that formally recognizes Russian control could provide Putin with a face-saving exit from a conflict that has proven more difficult and expensive than initially anticipated. President Trump's approach to resolving the Ukraine conflict has introduced a controversial element to the peace discussions: the concept of territory swapping. Trump has suggested that any potential peace deal might involve some form of territorial exchange with Russia, an idea that fundamentally differs from the traditional approach of restoring internationally recognized borders through diplomatic means. The concept of territory swapping, while not unprecedented in international relations, represents a dramatic departure from the position held by most Western allies throughout the Ukraine conflict. The United States and its NATO partners have consistently maintained that Ukraine's territorial integrity must be respected, and that any resolution to the conflict should be based on the restoration of Ukraine's internationally recognized borders as they existed before Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea. Trump's suggestion of territorial swapping appears to acknowledge the military realities on the ground while seeking a pragmatic solution to end the fighting. This approach recognizes that forcing Russia to withdraw from all occupied territories might be militarily and politically impossible, at least in the short term. Instead, it opens the door to a negotiated settlement that could involve Ukraine receiving compensation for lost territory through other means, whether territorial, economic, or security-related. The reaction from Ukrainian leadership to this suggestion has been swift and unequivocal. President Volodymyr Zelenskyy declared on Saturday that his countrymen will not give their land to occupiers. This statement reflects not just Zelenskyy's personal position, but the broader sentiment among Ukrainians who have fought and died to defend their homeland over the past 3 years. Zelenskyy's rejection of territorial concessions carries enormous weight because it comes from the leader of the nation most directly affected by the conflict. Since the invasion began, Zelenskyy has become an international symbol of resistance against aggression, and his words carry significant influence with both the Ukrainian people and the international community that has supported Ukraine's defense efforts. The Ukrainian president's position also reflects the deep emotional and cultural significance that the contested territories hold for the Ukrainian people. These are not abstract lines on a map, but communities where generations of Ukrainian families have lived, worked, and built their lives. The idea of permanently surrendering these areas to an occupying force strikes at the heart of Ukrainian national identity and sovereignty. Behind Zelenskyy's public statement lies a complex political reality within Ukraine itself. Any Ukrainian leader who agreed to territorial concessions would face enormous domestic pressure from a population that has endured tremendous sacrifices to defend their country. Families who have lost loved ones in the conflict, communities that have been displaced, and soldiers who have fought on the front lines would likely view territorial concessions as a betrayal of their sacrifices. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to stay updated on this developing story and other major international events. The divergence between Trump's pragmatic approach and Ukraine's principled stance creates a fundamental tension that will likely define the Alaska summit. How these competing visions can be reconciled, if at all, remains one of the central questions facing the negotiators as they prepare for their historic meeting. The logistical complexity of organizing the Alaska summit reflects the high stakes and delicate nature of the diplomatic mission at hand. A senior White House official has revealed that planning for Friday's meeting remains fluid, indicating that even the basic structure and participation in this historic encounter are still being negotiated in real time. The fluid nature of the planning process suggests several important factors at play. First, the complexity of coordinating between American and Russian advance teams, each with their own security requirements, protocol demands, and political considerations, creates numerous potential points of friction that must be resolved before the leaders can meet. Second, the ongoing military situation in Ukraine means that circumstances on the ground could influence the timing, format, or even the feasibility of the summit itself. Perhaps most significantly, the White House official statement reveals that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy could potentially participate in the Alaska meeting. This possibility transforms the summit from a bilateral American-Russian discussion into a potentially trilateral negotiation that would include the leader of the nation most directly affected by any agreement reached. Zelenskyy's potential participation raises important questions about the format and structure of the summit. Would the Ukrainian president participate in all discussions, or would there be separate bilateral meetings followed by trilateral sessions? How would his presence affect the dynamic between Trump and Putin, two leaders who have historically had a complex relationship that predates the Ukraine conflict? The possibility of Zelenskyy's participation also addresses one of the most significant criticisms that could be leveled against any agreement reached without Ukrainian involvement. Throughout the conflict, Ukrainian officials have insisted that nothing about Ukraine should be decided without Ukraine. Having Zelenskyy present would eliminate concerns that major powers are negotiating over Ukraine's head and making decisions that affect Ukrainian sovereignty without Ukrainian input. From a practical standpoint, including Zelenskyy in the summit would require additional security arrangements, as the Ukrainian president has been a target of Russian assassination attempts throughout the conflict. Bringing him to Alaska would necessitate extraordinary security measures and coordination between American, Ukrainian, and potentially other allied security services. The logistical challenges extend beyond security to include communication and translation services. While Putin speaks some English and Trump presumably has access to Russian interpreters, adding Ukrainian to the mix requires additional linguistic support to ensure that all parties can communicate effectively and that nothing is lost in translation during crucial negotiations. Weather conditions in Alaska during mid-August could also play a role in the summit logistics. While August is generally considered one of the better months for weather in Alaska, the remote location still presents challenges for transportation, communication, and media coverage that wouldn't exist at more traditional diplomatic venues. The involvement of media and public communication represents another fluid element in the planning process. Will there be joint press conferences, individual statements from each leader? The communication strategy around the summit could significantly influence public perception of any outcomes, making media arrangements a crucial component of the diplomatic choreography. The Alaska Summit represents a pivotal moment in 21st century international relations, with implications that extend far beyond the immediate question of ending the fighting in Ukraine. The meeting between Trump and Putin, potentially joined by Zelenskyy, could establish precedents for how future international conflicts are resolved and what principles will guide global diplomacy in the decades to come. The historical significance of this moment cannot be overstated. If successful, the Alaska Summit could mark the end of the largest conventional war in Europe since World War II. The Ukraine conflict has fundamentally altered the international security environment, reinvigorated military alliances, and forced nations around the world to reconsider their defense strategies and international relationships. The choice to hold this crucial meeting in Alaska adds layers of historical resonance to the proceedings. Alaska's unique position as the closest American territory to Russia, combined with its history as a peaceful transfer of territory between the two nations, creates a symbolic backdrop that emphasizes both the potential for cooperation and the importance of respecting territorial boundaries. The broader implications for international law and global governance are profound. How the Ukraine conflict is resolved will send signals to other nations about what kinds of territorial disputes are acceptable, what methods of conflict resolution are legitimate, and what role international law plays in governing relations between sovereign states. For the United States, the summit represents a test of Trump's diplomatic approach and his ability to navigate complex international crises. Success in Alaska could validate his negotiating style and strengthen his position in future international disputes. Failure could damage American credibility and complicate efforts to resolve other global conflicts. For Russia, the summit offers an opportunity to end international isolation and begin the process of normalizing relations with the West. However, Putin's approach to the negotiations will signal whether Russia is genuinely seeking a sustainable peace or merely a temporary respite that allows it to consolidate territorial gains. For Ukraine, regardless of whether Zelenskyy participates directly, the summit will determine the country's future territorial integrity, security arrangements, and relationship with both Russia and the broader international community. The decisions made in Alaska will affect Ukrainian sovereignty for generations to come. The precedent established by any agreement could influence how other territorial disputes around the world are handled. Countries involved in their own border conflicts will be watching closely to understand what compromises the international community considers acceptable and what principles it will uphold or abandon. As Friday approaches, the world holds its breath. The Alaska summit could mark the beginning of a new chapter in international relations, one that either upholds the principles of territorial integrity and peaceful conflict resolution, or establishes new norms based on pragmatic acceptance of military realities. The stakes could not be higher. In the wilderness of Alaska, 3 leaders may determine not just the fate of Ukraine, but the future of international law, the credibility of democratic institutions, and the question of whether aggression can ultimately be rewarded in the modern world. Whether you view this summit as a necessary step toward peace or a dangerous compromise with aggression, its outcome will shape international relations for years to come. Make sure to like this video, share it with others interested in understanding this historic moment, and subscribe to our channel for continued coverage of the developments that emerge from this unprecedented meeting in Alaska.